The session that we are having basically is to create more awareness about the issues that are related to fertility. Before we go on with the session, the first thing I would like to do is urge each and every one of you to please go in and take your vaccination. They say jaan hai to jahan hai. So everything is worth it once we are safe. So please encourage your family members and you yourself also, please go ahead and take the vaccination as and when it's available. Before we start again, let me give you a little brief about the Geoparcy program. The Geoparcy program was started by the Ministry of Minority Affairs, Government of India in 2013. We are very grateful to the Ministry of Minority Affairs for all the support they have extended to the Parsi community. The need for Geoparcy basically started because, as many of you may be aware, there was a drastic decline in the Parsi population, almost an 18% decline per decade that the community was facing. Of course, there had various issues about the reason why the decline was there, and I'm sure today's speaker will throw some light about that also, about infertility related to age. But besides that, of course, things needed to be done, action needed to be taken, and that's where the Geoparcy team stepped in. We are very happy to announce we have 325 babies added to the Parsi community in the last 7 years. Of course, it seems like a drop in the ocean, but they say, tipe tipe sarovar bharai, like every drop counts in the making of the ocean. So yes, and how did we achieve that? There were three things that we are focusing on. One is, of course, infertility and issues related to that. Up to 8 lakhs amount is given as a support to Parsi couples to help them have a baby. Along with that, also 4,000 rupees per child less than 8 years of age is given to couples as child care support to encourage them to have more than one child. Also, we have a lot of elderly dependents that Parsi couples have to look after. The dependency ratio is very high. So we also provide 4,000 rupees per senior citizen that the couple is looking after, again to encourage them to have children. More details about the income criteria, the way you can register to the Geoparcy program, all that is available on our website. That's geoparcy.org. So not taking much of your time, I will just hand over the mic to Shamla Anand, my colleague, and she'll introduce the speaker for today. Have a great session. Over to you, Shamla.
Thank you so much, Pearl. Thank you. Welcome, viewers, to yet another special created especially for you. With the way things are going and still no signs of the pandemic letting up, it becomes a little difficult to plan things, and planning a family is a really big, important decision-making process. Geoparcy decided to bring to the public some doctors into their homes, and this will ease the minds of the people to a great extent. All the questions that one needs answered can be done on this platform. We welcome Dr. Rita Modi, who is an infertility and IVF specialist practicing at the Surya Fertility Clinic, Santa Cruz, and also has her own practice in Thane. Another doctor we have, Dr. Farzan Mistry, who is an IVF specialist and a gynecologist practicing in Opera House and is also attached to the Cloud9 at Kandivli and Masina Hospital, Vaikala. Dr. Shiraz Habibwala Wajidar, I'm sorry, she cannot be here today because of previous prior appointments, is an obstetrician and gynecologist, practices at the Holy Family at the PD Hinduja Hospital in Khar, in Masina Hospital, Bridge Candy, Surya Hospital, and a few others. Viewers are welcome to ask questions, whatever questions they may have in the chat box, and if required, can also direct it to Pearl Mistry and Shamla Anand. We will be writing our telephone numbers and other contact details on the chat box, and full confidentiality will be maintained. So you're also requested to send in your suggestions and any other issues and concerns, and we will definitely address it. Over to you without much delay to Dr. Farzan Mistry. Welcome, Dr. Farzan Mistry.
Thanks a lot, Shamla. Can I just share my screen if possible?
Yes, please.
Is my screen visible?
Very much.
Okay. Okay. So, good morning, everyone. Thanks for logging in for today's session. I'm Dr. Parzan Mistry. I'm a consultant obstetrician gynecologist and infertility specialist attached to Masina, Bhatia, Wockhardt, St. Elizabeth's, Apollo, SRCC Children Hospital, Mumbai. Nowadays, the basic trend which we are seeing on social media is either someone getting vaccinated or someone delivering a baby. And this is what we are generally seeing. You open your Instagram, you open your Facebook, and the first thing pops out is either someone taking a jab or someone or the other getting a child. So what is it when you're planning a pregnancy? Now, most of the young people wish for at least 2 to 3 children in their lifetime. Now, female aged 27 or less have 90% chances of conception through a natural conception. However, female aged 31 or more, that is the same percentage, holds true if they accept some form of fertility treatment. So the dictum goes not too early, not too late, and not too close. Whenever we are talking about infertility, the textbook definition of infertility always mentions the inability to conceive after 2 years of unprotected sex. Now, it almost affects 10% of the couples all around the world and almost 8 to 10% of the couples in India. Now, the 2 years of this figure comes because almost 84% conceive within 1 year of trying and 92% conceive after 2 years of coitus. And that is why this 2 years definition has come into play. But however, according to me, this definition doesn't hold true for all the couples. The definition changes with the age of the couple as well as the other factors if someone is having. So if the age of the couple is somewhere around 25 to 30, this definition might hold true for them. Similarly, if the age goes on to say around 35 to 40, the same age might, the same percentage and same bracket of 2 years might not be sufficient for these couples. Primary infertility is when the conception has never ever taken place, and secondary infertility is when the conception has been documented before, either if someone having miscarriage or having any ectopic pregnancy are taken into secondary infertility. Now, this is a famous comic strip from the Peanuts comic. It states, whose fault is it? Whose fault is it? Nobody's fault. What do you mean? Someone has to take the blame. Now, whenever in India, when we are focusing more on the patriarchal society, we know that most of the brunt of infertility is given to female. But when you see this chart, it's not so. Almost 30% of the infertility is linked to female infertility. The similar percentage, that is 30%, is linked to male. That means the infertility brunt is carried by both male as well as female couples. Mixed infertility is seen, that is both the causes. It may be a female as well as the male factors in 20%. And in almost 20% of the cases, we see that the infertility has no cause. Now, when we are seeing this pie chart, almost the common cause of infertility in the female is linked to either defects in the ovulation or endometriosis or any tube problems. Whereas when you see the graph in males, most of the causes of male infertility is unexplained. Sometimes it might be due to varicoceles, or sometimes it might be due to testicular failures. So what basically is what we require for a normal conception? Now, I generally explain to my patients that there is a uterus, there are tubes, and there are ovaries. So in one ovary, one follicle develops. Once it ruptures out, an egg comes and sits inside the tube. Once the sperm enters the uterus, goes and sits in the fallopian tube where it meets the egg, and that's where the pregnancy takes place. So the prerequisites for a normal pregnancy is, first, the ovaries and the ovulation should be normal. Secondly, the tubes which are there should be open and functional. So that's what it's very important to know, that most of the couples have open tubes, but they are not functional tubes, which may further result into pregnancies sitting in the tubes and cause ectopic pregnancy. So not only open tubes, but a normal and a functional fallopian tube is also required. Normal womb or the uterus, normal general health and hormonal status of the female, and normal semen parameters in male. So these are the basic prerequisites for when we are talking about normal conception. That is the normal ovaries, normal tubes, normal uterus, normal hormone status of the female, and normal sperm counts. Now, A male generally tends to produce sperms even at the age of 40 to 50 years. But unfortunately, that's not true with females. Now, when you see this figure at birth, almost if you say that there are almost 100% of the eggs, at puberty, the egg percentage reduces to 23. At 30, they reduce to almost 12%, and at 40, at 3%. So what is happening over here is as the period of the women starts, each egg keeps on coming out. And as the age advances, the egg numbers keep on declining. And eventually all the eggs get exhausted. And that's when the menopause sets in. So it's very essential when you see that almost a woman is born with 1.5 million eggs, whereas when she's planning a pregnancy, that's around the age of 30 years, you see almost only 1,80,000 eggs are left with her. So it's very important to know that there is an age factor which is linked to female infertility. Now, what are the basic causes of infertility when we are talking about females? Now, age is, like we said, is the foremost factor, foremost important aspect which causes female infertility. Secondly, when I spoke about the prerequisites of reproduction, I said that the tubes should be open. So any blockages in the tube or any functional abnormalities in the tubes can result into infertility. Now, these common causes of these blockage of the tubes or the non-functioning of the tubes are sexually transmitted infections, which may be either bacterial or viral. Next, like I pointed out, that the uterus should be normal. So anything which is there in the uterus which prevents the pregnancy to carry on or prevents the embryo or the baby to stick to the uterus can cause infertility. Now, the common causes what we see in the uterus which affect fertility are the fibroids, the infections which are there in the uterus, which in our terms we call it as endometritis, which is the infection of the lining of the uterus. The next common cause what we see nowadays is endometriosis, and we'll come later on in the presentation as to what basically this endometriosis is all about. Again, as I pointed out, that the hormone status of the women is very important as far as conception is concerned. Now, nowadays, when we are seeing more of polycystic ovaries patients, and this is what terminology which you must have read at many places, and many women nowadays, the younger age bracket, are coming up with the sonography suggestive of polycystic ovaries. Again, we have the other hormones which are also taken into consideration are the prolactin hormones and the thyroid hormones. Drug abuse, smoking, stress, and poor nutrition are also causes of infertility. Now, whenever we are talking about stress, it's very important because lot of the infertility is linked to stress. What we call it as, it is like a vicious cycle. So the stress causes infertility and the infertility is further causing stress, and this cycle continues. So somewhere you have to break this cycle, that is, you have to lower down your stress levels. As I pointed out earlier in this slide, that a woman is born with almost 100% of the eggs which she has at birth, and eventually after the age of 30-35, the egg numbers decline. That is, she almost has 30% of the eggs when she's planning a pregnancy at 30 years. Now, fertility decreases drastically after 30-35 years of age. Now, like I said, that these are the egg numbers which are there at birth. Eventually, the egg numbers goes down. But what we see after 35 years is there is a sudden drop of these egg numbers. Now, there are certain cases also in younger women, that is 20% of the younger women might also have egg numbers. Now, like you see in this graph, almost by 30 years, there are 7% of the couples who are infertile. And as the age advances, the percentage of the infertility steps up. That is 11% of the couples are infertile by 35, 33% by 40, and almost 87% by the age of 45 years of age. Now, like I pointed out in the definition, that the 2 years bracket, whenever we are defining infertility, that is inability to conceive after 2 years of marriage. Under 35, it becomes almost 2 years you can take. But after 35 or 38, if a couple is not conceiving naturally in 6 months of trying, she needs a treatment. And especially in 39 years or older, just 3 months of trying in the female doesn't conceive, she requires some help. Now, whenever we are talking about the tubes, like I said, that the blocked tubes as well as the dysfunction of the tubes can cause infertility. So the damaged tubes, I said infections, endometriosis, and something what we call it as hydrosalpinx. So what I generally explain to my patient is there is a pipe. If this pipe is carrying water, if you block the two pipes, what happens is that the pipe swells in, and this is what happens with the tube. That is the water accumulation in the tube. This is basically a water of infection, causes it is basically known as hydrosalpinx. And further on, if the bacteria grow inside it and the pus forms, it's called as pyrosalpinx. Like I pointed out, again, fibroids are the most commonest cause of infertility linked to uterus. Almost 3% of the infertility is due to fibroids. What do basic fibroids do is they change the shape and the architecture of the uterus. Sometimes if the fibroid is way near to the fallopian tube, they cause a blockage of the fallopian tubes. They affect the blood flow of the uterus and prevent the blood from entering the inside of the uterine cavity. Now, generally what we see that fibroids are such a commonest, rather we can say it as tumor, but when even I'm saying tumor, it is not harmful because it's only that 1% of the fibroids basically lead to cancer. So it's a very, very low percentage that these fibroids might lead to cancer. So what these tumors or fibroids do is basically, if the fibroid is a small fibroid which is sitting in the body of the uterus or at the head of the uterus, you do not have to worry. But the fibroids which are generally pressing on the lining of the uterus where the baby is going to stick are the ones which causes problems. Now, even we have certain uterine abnormalities. That is, whenever the uterus forms, the uterus is formed in two separate parts, and then further on it joins and the uterus forms as one. So what happens is sometimes the uterus doesn't fuse properly and it results into septum or a little partition in the uterus, which further might prevent baby from or embryo from getting implanted, or further even cause higher chance of miscarriages. There might be that one part of the uterus doesn't form and only the one part of the uterus is formed, which is unicornuate uterus, or sometimes in the uterus doesn't fuse and causes bicornuate uterus. So all these are linked to some form of infertility. Now, this is a very common cause of infertility after we see PCOS is endometriosis. Now, what is endometriosis? Now, whenever we talk of endometriosis, initially it was linked that, when the lining of the uterus forms, it comes and it sheds out through the cervix and out. But sometimes this lining goes and deposits in the uterus. Sometimes it goes and deposits in the ovaries. This causes accumulation of the lining over there and gets activated every period. So endometriosis is classically characterized by three things, that is painful periods, painful sex, and infertility. Most of these times endometriosis just goes skipped and we do not know the cause of infertility. And whenever we are finding out the cause, endometriosis doesn't manifest itself so much, because the only way to diagnose endometriosis is to put in a laparoscope and see whether there is any deposits of endometriosis. Sometimes endometriosis may be seen on sonographies. That is when you have certain cysts in the ovaries or swelling of the uterus, which we call it as chocolate cyst in the ovaries or adenomyosis. Now, all these endometriosis spoil the internal environment of the reproductive system and further causes infertility. Now, causes what we say that link to ovaries are PCOS, high levels of prolactin hormones, premature ovarian failure. That is, the function of the ovary stops before the age of 40 years, that is before the menopause. If there are any surgeries which are done on the ovaries, like removal of the cyst, which removes the normal part of the ovary and causes the egg numbers to decline. Again, like I pointed out, age-related fertility decline and certain infections like mumps. Now, polycystic ovaries is a common cause which we are seeing of infertility these days. Now, many of the patients come with a sonography report suggestive of polycystic ovaries and come and tell us that, doctor, we have polycystic ovaries. But that is absolutely not true. For you to be labeled as polycystic ovaries, you should have at least two of these three criteria positive. That is, one, you should be either having irregular periods, you should be having raised male hormones in your body, either when we are doing by blood tests, that is by testosterone and other blood tests, or you have manifestations of increased male hormones in your body, that is excessive facial hair growth or pimples, acne, increased sideburns or hair fall, or your sonography which is suggestive of PCOS. So any two of these three criteria are positive, then and then only you're labeled as PCOS. A lot of medicines have come and supplementations have come in PCOS. We have metformin, we have myo-inositol. We give medicines to basically develop the egg, because what happens is that the egg which is formed in the ovary doesn't tend to rupture out and causes failure of ovulation. That is, failure of the egg coming out of the follicle. So we can give certain medicines to make the follicles or to break the follicles. And then further, if they do not achieve pregnancy, we can go to IUIs and IVF. Like we said that on one spectrum, we have polycystic ovaries where we have a lot of eggs in the bodies. The other spectrum, we have that females don't have much egg in their bodies, and which is called as premature ovarian insufficiency. It is basically lead to genetic issues, infections, and surgeries. So lifestyle factors which are being brought to basically combat infertility is have a healthy diet, have a well-balanced diet, maintain your weight with a body mass index of less than 30. So do not put on a lot of weight, exercise regularly. Smoking does hamper fertility. It causes miscarriages. So smoking and drinking should be taken into control. Like I said, the 30% causes are linked to male, 30% are linked to female, but almost 30% of the times you do not know what exactly the reason of the infertility is, and that is when the unexplained infertility comes into place. Like I said, that endometriosis sometimes doesn't manifest, so you need to put in a laparoscope and see whether it is just endometriosis. So what are the investigations? Like we said, that the egg, tubes, uterus, sperms, and the hormones have to be taken into consideration. So female hormone profile, which we have to see, the egg numbers, certain tests to know the egg numbers, ultrasound to check the uterus, dye test or the tube test, which we generally push in a dye and check whether the tubes are open, semen test, certain tests to check the egg numbers, that is the AMH or the antral follicle counts, and rubella immunity check. AMH is a very, very important test when it comes to infertility. And this is one test which all infertility consultants advise. Now, this generally gives us a rough idea about the number of eggs in your body. And this is a very good test because it doesn't have to be done on a certain day of the cycle. You can do it anytime, whether you're in your periods or whether you've not got your periods. It also gives us a rough prediction of when you're going to achieve your menopause. That is, if the AMH is very low, you tend to attain your menopause earlier. If the AMH is high, we are more so having PCOS. It also helps us in our IVF treatments, that it helps us to regulate the dose of the drugs which we give in AMH. Now, whenever we said that tube testing, either we can do it by laparoscopy or by HSG. HSG is just basic an X-ray, wherein we push in the dye through the cervix and we check the spillage of the dye in the X-ray and see whether the tubes are open. Similarly, we can do in laparoscopy, wherein we put a small telescope through the belly button, and we can push in the dye and see whether the tubes are open. Laparoscopy gives us a better advantage to see how the uterus outside and everything is, whether there is any problem in the ovaries, and especially if there is any issue, we can clear it out at the same time. Ultrasonography forms a very important part in infertility, which helps us to know how the uterus is, whether there is any fibroids, to help us see the ovaries, whether there are any cysts, whether there are any pathologies which are there in the ovaries of the uterus. Now, very important to know that the sperm test forms a very important component. Like I said, that almost equal number of infertility is linked to males. So it is very important to know this fertility. Whenever we are doing an infertility test, many males do not come out to do the sperm test or semen test, but it is very, very important that we do this test. And these are the recent values that account more than 15 million, mortality more than 40%, and abnormal forms, almost 96% of the abnormal forms are still normal. So the morphology, normal sperm morphology as less as 4% is also acceptable. Now, basically what we do whenever there is infertility, in certain cases where PCOS, where the ovaries don't form eggs, we tend to give medicines. We tend to induce formation of the eggs in the body. And further, if they don't rupture, we can give them injections for the follicles to rupture out. So the drugs which we commonly use are clomiphene and letrozole. We can try out with this. And the other part, we have what we call it as a ART, or the assisted reproductive techniques, in which we intervene and we help in women getting pregnant. They are either IUIs or intrauterine insemination, IVF, what we call it as in vitro fertilization, ICSI, which is intracytoplasmic sperm injection, and then we have donor eggs, donor sperms, donor embryos, and further on going ahead, we have surrogacy. Now, whenever we are talking about IUI, what is IUI? It is just that we place the semen sample inside the uterus as close to the fallopian tube to facilitate fertilization. Now, IUI is generally done when there is a mild male factor for infertility, when there is a blockage at the cervix somewhere, where there is mild endometriosis, or when the couple cannot have proper sex, or there is an ejaculatory dysfunction, and also in cases of unexplained infertility. So what we do is basically we collect the semen sample, we process the semen sample. This is what an IUI catheter generally looks like. We take the test tube, we aspirate out the semen sample into this IUI catheter, and then we put this catheter inside the cervix and we inject the specimen, the semen sample, inside the cavity of the cervix, which is as close to the fallopian tubes. When generally do we have to do IVF? IVF is basically done when the tubes are blocked or the tubes are non-functional. Also in cases of endometriosis, also in cases of male infertility, where there are decreased counts, motilities, where there are decreased egg numbers, basically commonly linked to age-related infertility. Certain cases of PCOS, where you have tried giving medicines, they're not forming eggs. For them, IUI have failed, and in such cases, we can do IVF. In a lot of cases of failed treatments, that is, they are married since almost 10, 12 years, they have not achieved pregnancy, you have tried naturally, they have tried IUIs, they have failed, you can step up to IVF. cases of unexplained infertility, and also nowadays in cases of genetic abnormalities, wherein we can take the eggs, we can take the sperm, make the embryo outside, do a genetic test on them, and put on the good genetic embryo, the embryo which is not genetically defective inside the couple. Now, what is an IVF? What we do in the IVF? In IVF, first we give injections. The injections go for around 10 to 12 days to form the eggs in the body. Now, once the eggs are ready, what we do is we call the patients to our IVF center and we do what is called as the egg pickup. In egg pickup, what we do is there is this needle. Don't go by the size of this needle because it goes down right from the vagina, goes inside the ovaries. Patient is under anesthesia, so there is not much of pain which is associated with the egg pickup. We go in through the vagina, go in inside the ovaries, we prick the ovaries, and this tube is connected to the suction pump, and we collect all these eggs inside the tube. Now, once these eggs are collected inside the tube, these eggs are taken into the laboratory and we put them in the petri dish and we check them inside the microscope for the egg. Now, this is what generally an egg looks like. Now, once we get the egg out, what we do is we do nowadays, either we put the sperms along with the eggs and help them fertilize, or what we do is ICSI, whereas we take the sperm and we inject the sperm right inside the egg and we form the embryo, which is called as intracytoplasmic sperm injection. So when the sperm is injected inside the egg, it is called as ICSI. So this is what the embryo looks like on day 1. This is what the embryo looks like on day 2, which is 4-cellular. Then day 3, which is the 8-cell. Day 4, which is compaction over here, and day 5, which is called as the blastocyst. So this is what the embryos look like. So once these embryos are formed, then we go in for something which we call it as embryo transfer.
Excuse me, doctor.
Yeah.
Could you just show the last slide little near the camera so it's clearer?
The last, okay. So whenever we are talking about the eggs, this is what generally an egg looks like. And this is what generally the egg, this is generally what the egg looks like. And we generally inject the sperm, which we call it as ICSI. Now, once we are doing the ICSI, this is what the general embryos look like. This is what the embryo looks like on day 1, okay, which is we have the 2 cells over here. Then what we have it as day 2, which we have the 4 cells over here. You can see 4 cells over here. Then day 3, which we have the 8 cells over here. Like you can see, the 8 is the highest number over here. Then day 4, which looks like a compaction, it looks like a mulberry, which we call it as morula. And day 5, which is the blastocyst, which is the highest stage of the embryo. Now, once this embryo forms, we do what we call it as an embryo transfer. So what we do is this embryo is very small, it is microscopic. We load this embryo inside this catheter. And once the catheter is loaded, we place the embryo inside the uterus. We inject the embryo inside the uterus, which is at the right position. And that is what the IVF process is all about. After that, we wait for 15 days and we check for the pregnancy test, whether the pregnancy has achieved or not. And it is very important to know that a lot of people come with the expectations of IVF being a success, but it is very, very important to know that IVF is not 100%. People say that, oh, we have done IVF, we are surely going to conceive. There are a lot of factors which go into IVF. It also depends on what we call it as the egg factor, if the egg is normal or not, the sperm factor, whether the sperm is normal or not, or the embryo factor, whether the embryo is normal or not. And again, whenever we are doing the embryo transfer. Now, these all factors basically we can regulate, but one thing we can't regulate is whether the baby or the embryo which is formed is going to stick inside the lining of the uterus. Now, this is what we cannot guarantee, and that's why the success of IVF is not 100%. Now, whenever we are talking about IVF, there are certain complications coming with IVF. Is we have twins more so with IVF, and a lot of couples come and tell us that, doctor, we really don't want twins, because IVF pregnancies are linked to twins. We have celebrities who have got triplets and twins, so we don't want that. So what we can do is, like I said, that, generally we either transfer this day 3 embryo or we transfer this day 5 embryo. So either transferring this 3 day 3 embryos, we can just transfer this 1 day 5 embryo, which gives a better pregnancy rates and further reduces the chances of twinning. Again, there are higher chances of miscarriages, basically with the age of more than 35 years. Now, eventually, as we know that the egg number also drops after 35, there are higher chances of having genetic defects also after 35. Now, whenever we are talking of pregnancy, we say that, God is absolutely great. So, if the pregnancy is good to continue, it will eventually continue. But if the pregnancy is bad, However, the uterus will tend to reject it and the miscarriage will happen. So a lot of the genetic abnormalities have a higher chance of miscarriage because a lot of these IVF patients are in an age bracket of more than 35 years. Now, there is also an increased risk of blood pressure in pregnancies, which are linked mostly to the donor eggs and donor embryos. So when do we have to take these donor eggs? So donor egg is when a donor egg is taken and a sperm of the husband is taken, and that is what we call it as a donor egg treatment. Now, this is when it is done, is when the eggs are only absent. In females, it may be due to any genetic causes, or basically the ovaries are damaged due to any surgeries on the ovaries. If there has been a cyst in the ovaries, which was completely engulfing the ovary, which had to be removed, or there is a premature menopause, like we said, is basically premature ovarian failures, or any cancer patients who have taken any medicines or radiations which damage the eggs, or the age of the women is very high. That is when we can take these donor eggs. And if the husband semen is normal, we can inject the husband semen into the donor eggs and give a pregnancy. Now, what is donor sperms? Donor sperms is when we take the egg of the female, but the sperm of a donor. Now, this is basically done when the male partner doesn't have sperm, or what we call it in our term as azoospermia, or there is decreased sperm counts, or there is decreased motility, or the male that has any ejaculatory dysfunctions, that is premature ejaculation or erectile dysfunction, or a male has certain genetic defects which can pass on to the baby. So that is when you need to change the sperm, okay? Or basically a male has any sexually transmitted disease which can be transmitted if taken into consideration. So that is when we take the egg of the female and the donor sperm, and we can give a pregnancy. The next is donor embryo, wherein we completely change the embryo itself. That is, we change the embryo from a normal, that is, we take a donor egg, donor sperm, make a donor embryo, and transfer this donor embryo. Now, these are basically in single women who want pregnancy, or couples having difficulty in getting pregnant with their own eggs. So basically a women of a higher age bracket, a male having less sperms in the body, you can change it and you can get in a donor embryo and you can plan fertility treatment. So how do you prevent, there is obviously, as we have learned, the dictum is prevention is better than cure. So as we said that eat good, exercise in moderation, plan family, but do not overplan it. A lot of couples, like we discussed in our last forum, is they go on indulging into over planning a lot, and in that whole issue there comes something which is called as performance anxiety. That is, you have to keep relations only at the time of ovulation, and that is when the problem arises. So plan your pregnancy, but don't overplan it. Like I pointed out earlier, that stress is a very important aspect. So there is a stress infertility cycle which you have to break. So stress causes infertility, infertility will further cause stress. So you have to break it by removing the stress factor aside. Avoid any addictions, that is alcohol, smoking, or any drugs. Start a family soon if you want to plan a big family, that is, don't wait long. And if you really, really want to wait long, you might as well go and freeze your gametes. Either freeze eggs or freeze sperms. Now, like I even said that, the male tend to produce sperms even at the age of 40 and 50. It is very important to know that there is a genetic damage, or what we call it as a DNA damage, which takes place at the sperms after even 40, 45 years of age. So it's always better to freeze and preserve your gametes when you want to postpone your pregnancy. Now, this is a totally different session which we'll be taking, where we can freeze the eggs, where we can freeze the sperm, and what are the advantages of them. So thanks a lot for your kind hearing. And these are the contacts of Geoparsi. And if you have any questions, you can get back to me, or you can get back to Shamla or Pearl on the contact numbers given above. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Faizan. It was really an eye-opening and very informative session. I'm sure the viewers have got a lot of information, and of course, we'll have a lot of questions. So dear viewers, any questions you need to put in, please put them up on the chat box and we can take them. Can you hear me, Dr. Faizan? My voice is clear?
Yes, it is.
Great, great. So till we are getting more questions, I had a few as I interact a lot with couples who are undergoing IVF or have fertility issues. One question that has come up currently after the pandemic is regarding vaccination. People, couples who are undergoing IVF, or either just pregnant, about to deliver, or breastfeeding. They have quite a few myths, you would say, or questions in their mind regarding safety of taking or the side effects that they could face with the COVID vaccine. Could you please throw some light on that, Doctor?
Yeah, so I think we had a chat earlier also
Yes,
at the
but for
start
the
of the
viewer.
session about it, Pearl,
Mm.
but a lot of our
Yeah.
viewers were not there on board. Now we have to understand that honestly, Government of India has come up with the with the guidelines as that even patients who are pregnant can take the vaccine, even patients who are wanting an infertility treatment can take the vaccine. But like Pearl pointed out, I don't know, Pearl doesn't want to voice it out right now, but Pearl pointed out that a lot of gynecologists themselves are saying that, you better hold on the vaccines till the time, you achieve your pregnancy or you deliver or basically you finish your fertility treatment. Now, what I would like to say over here is whenever we are taking into infertility patients, of one is the infertility patients and one is the pregnant bit. Now, whenever we are talking about infertility patients, it's very important that we know that, all these patients have some amount of psychological impact on them earlier. And, they have gone through that whole lot of grind of going through an IUI, IVF and all. And, a lot of these fertility and, you'll see these patients, the husbands are so over supportive, patients are so overprotective, that they don't want even the slightest mishaps happening in the pregnancy. And with the rumors coming up that vaccine causes these side effects, can result into some say that it results into infertility, some say that you can't take it during some part of menstrual cycles and all, have already put in a lot of negative thoughts in the minds of the couple. Now what I would suggest is that as a doctor, as a primary healthcare worker, because when we are in touch with the patient, it's very important that we should enforce vaccinations. We should tell patients that, listen, I mean, you taking a vaccine will be always good, because there is a chance that if you probably have COVID during the pregnancy or during your treatment, you might rather have decreased severity of the symptoms. It might not be like a full-blown COVID, if you get vaccinated. But what we are dealing with over here, Pearl, is we always have to take our patients mindset and patients decision into concern, and that is very, very important for us as doctors, because we cannot enforce any treatment, or we cannot enforce a vaccination on someone. So if the patient wishes that to postpone her vaccination, nowadays I'm very sure that a lot of IVF doctors, or what we are doing is more of freeze all cycle. That is what we do, is we take out the eggs, we freeze them, and then after a month or so we go in for an embryo transfer, which basically generally gives us a little higher edge as far as the success rate is concerned. Now this is completely patient patient oriented. We don't do freeze all for all, but nowadays most of the cycles are going into more of freeze all cycles, wherein we take out the embryos, make the embryos, freeze them in the liquid nitrogen, and after a month or so we transfer the embryos. So what we can do is, rather we can take this opportunity of this 1-2 months which we have it in our hand, and probably give them an option of getting vaccinated in that interim period, that once the eggs are out, you can go get vaccinated. Now, there are a lot of, unfortunately, the Covishield has a longer duration of say around 82 to 84 days between the two doses spread apart. Even Dr. Rita would agree that, when we initially took the doctors, when we took the dose, it was almost, I think in the month of Feb, March, and we were given shots only at the at the bracket of 1 month, so we had taken 2 doses just a month apart, and touch wood, we are doing good. Nothing has happened to us. So, there are a lot of vaccines, newer vaccines, which are coming into play. We have Covaxin, which is our own Indian made vaccine. We have Sputnik, which is also being launched right now. A lot of these patients are really pro for Sputnik. In these vaccines, the bracket is quite less. So, they can take these form of vaccines and finish off their course in a month interim period before they plan for a embryo transfer, and that is putting in the egg embryos inside. But it is very important also for the pregnant women to understand that it is very important that we give them an option of vaccination, because many people, there are a lot of myths which are surrounding the vaccine. So it is very important that the first contact, which is the doctor, which is going to the patient, which is going to the doctor, we generally tell them the pros and the cons. Not many patients are aware about the advantages of taking the vaccine. So that's what we need to put in. Yes, there are certain contraindications for the vaccine. So it's very important for us also to know that there are certain allergies, there are certain thrombotic states, and there are certain areas where women cannot take vaccine. So it's very important that patients come to us, pregnant patients come to us. We generally can tell them that, this is the right time to take the vaccine. Probably you are a candidate, probably you should be waiting. And, that's how we can go ahead. I think Dr. Rita would also, if she can throw more light on it from her point of view, I think that will be better.
Yes, yeah. Dr. Parzan, you have very nicely elaborated on all the points. So as far as the vaccine is concerned, as Ms. Pearl Mistry started this discussion by saying that please go for vaccination. So that is what we all endorse. Please, everybody go for vaccination. Look at what the local guidelines currently are saying. So currently our Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, they have approved vaccine at all stages for everybody, as in above 18 years currently. So whether a lady is trying to conceive or is currently pregnant or is currently close to delivery or even breastfeeding, vaccine is considered safe. Please go for vaccine, because as Dr. Parzan said, it is not only going to prevent infection, but also decrease the severity. See, you need to be very, during pregnancy, supposing you have taken the vaccine, then you can freely move around, in the sense that, of course, within a, following the recommendations about distancing and everything, but you need to visit hospitals repeatedly. You need to go to the pathology lab, the radiology, you need to get your scans done. So it's not that you can totally confine yourself to home. So basically follow all the COVID norms that are issued locally from time to time. We need to follow what our Ministry of Health and Family Welfare is saying. So we are all for vaccine. That's one. Secondly, as far as the discussion, Dr. Parzan, it was excellent, exhaustive presentation. The take home I want everybody to remember is that do not take fertility for granted. It is something which is very natural, but increasingly we as human race are facing issues in conception. So just like we plan everything in our life, just like we create awareness among our kids, among our society, among our youngsters regarding their career, their studies, their everything. We support them for all the social things, everything. Similarly, we need to inculcate in them that, okay, this is also a very important aspect of life. Maybe at the age of 18, you are not realizing, but at the age of 30, 31, this is going to be an extremely important point. So, well, some broad planning has to be there, starting from that age, that, okay, I want to achieve this, and at that stage, I will be ready for a family. Because it's very good to be ambitious, do more studies, do more courses, do big, plan big careers, it is fine. But somewhere in between, you have to, fit in your personal life as well. Dr. Shiraz last time was giving her own example. I was really impressed. Very, very happy to see that she was having 3 kids. She is very proud of that. So please, Parsis, you are big contributors to India's development. I was presenting that in my last presentation. It was my tribute to the Parsi community. We would like to have your numbers increase. Please follow everything that the Geo Parsi Foundation, take benefit of all the schemes that are there. Feel free to contact our counselors. Feel free to bring your questions directly to them or to us. We will try our best to solve those questions and guide you towards your proper treatment and whatever is necessary. So it's not that fertility will always require a medical treatment. At some stage, maybe for some couples, maybe plan it well and plan it now. That's what I would like to say.
Thank you, Dr. Murthy. Doctor, I have a few more questions coming up. One was regarding red. Take this question regarding retroverted uterus. Would that anyway?
Well, I can't hear you. Well, your connection is breaking.
Okay.
Hello.
Yeah, I'll type the question on the chat box.
No, you're audible now. You're audible.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, the question that came up to me was retroverted uterus. Would that in any way hinder the IVF process?
Not at all. Not at all. Don't worry about that. It is just a variant of normal. So it is a normal thing. So do not worry at all.
Okay. Okay. Then one more word, a very long word come up. I'll try and pronounce it as best as I can.
Okay, Pearl, you're breaking.
Pearl, you're breaking again. Pearl, you're
Pearl,
breaking up.
put it on the chat, Pearl.
Hello.
I think she's putting it on
I'll
the
put
chat.
it on. I'll put it on the chat box.
Yeah, you are now very clear.
Yeah, you're clear now.
I'll still put it up on the chat box. Yeah.
We would love to hear you pronounce it, Pearl. Okay.
Okay, this is oligoasthenozoospermia. Okay, now when we are taking this word as such, what we'll do is we'll break up the word. Okay, so oligo means less, asthenos means slow, zoos means the sperms. So if there is a decrease in counts and motility of the sperm, it is called as oligoasthenozoospermia. Okay, now basically this is basically one of the factor which is linked to the male part of the infertility. When we are talking about male infertility, basically, like I said, that first of all, we need to, when I pointed out in my slide, it's very important to know what are the normal counts, what is the normal motility, and what is the normal morphology. Now, initially, when we were initially, the counts which were there were 20 million was taken as normal. Then we had 15 million taken as normal. Now we have as low as 10 million counts which is taken as normal. Okay, even when we are talking about the motility, when we have 4 types of motility. So when a sperm is going straight with high speed, which we call it as a forward progressive, okay, which is called it as a rapid progressive, linear, that is they go in straight line fast. Then we have which is called as rapid progressive non-linear, that is if they're going in fast but not in a straight line. Then we have the slow motility, which is basically what we call it as, when the sperms are moving at a very slow speed. Then we have just sperms wagging their tails, and then we have the immotile or the dead sperms. Okay, now the rapidly progressing sperms, that is the fast moving sperms, either straight or either in any direction, should be at least 32 to 34%. Now it is very important that that both 32 to, basically you can take the fast progressive linear as 32, and the total motility should be almost 40% should be motile sperms. So any counts which any sperm counts which are less than 10 million, or the motility which is less than 40%, is basically termed as oligoasthenozoospermia. Now, it also depends upon what exactly the count and the motility is. Like I said, that if there is a mild male factor infertility, suppose if there is count of almost 8-9 million, if the motility is suppose around 30-32%, 28 to 30%, in such cases, we can also plan an IUI, which is an intrauterine insemination, which I generally pointed out. That is, if the tubes are normal and if the eggs, that is the ovaries, are functioning fine. So we can go through the basic treatment, which is an IUI treatment, wherein we generally take the sperms, we process them, and only the good quality, high moving sperms, fast moving sperms are picked up and placed inside the uterus. But however, when there is a severe oligoasthenozoospermia, that is the count is 1 million, or the motility is only 10%, 5%, then in such cases, IVF is the treatment of choice. IVF, by IVF, I mean ICSI, wherein we generally take the sperm and we inject inside the eggs. Now we have a lot of, newer technologies coming into place. Initially, we had ICSI, now we have IMSI, wherein we magnify the sperm and see whether the sperm is also looking normal. And then we take that, the good looking sperm, and we fertilize the egg. So all these generally are terms which are linked with male factor infertility. So a borderline oligoasthenozoospermia can be managed with an IUI, but a severe oligoasthenozoospermia should be managed with IVF-ICSI.
Could you repeat after ICSI, what is the new process that is there?
What we do is, which is called as IMSI. Now, what happens is generally if this is the
IMSI.
sperm, ICSI is intracytoplasmic sperm injection. IMSI is intracytoplasmic morphologically selected sperm injection. So what is happening in ICSI is this sperm is magnified to 20 times. Whereas in IMSI, we magnify the sperms to almost 6,000 times. Okay, so we have a computer program which magnifies this sperm this big, almost 6,000 times. And we match these sperm parameters with that of the normal sperm. That is whether the head, the size of the head is fitting that of the normal head. The neck is fitting that of the normal neck. The tail is fitting that of the normal tail. whether there are any vacuoles or there are any, what we call it as abnormalities in the sperm. And if we see this highly magnified sperm is a good looking sperm, we select that and we pick that and put it for IVF, which is called as IMSI, which is intracytoplasmic morphologically selected sperm injection. So they are basically all linked to male infertility. And like I said, borderline can be treated with IUI, severe should be treated with IVF-XC or probably IMSI if the counts are, if there are very occasionally motile sperms which are seen in the sample.
The next question I've typed in, doctor.
Yeah, the question that age at which egg or sperm should be frozen.
Eggs or sperm, if planning pregnancy after 35.
Yeah, good question. Very pertinent question. So depends upon at what stage have you thought about it? At what stage have you got the information about it? But yeah, before 23, any sort of ART, any sort of assisted reproduction is not really needed or recommended. So beyond 23, at whatever age you want, you can do it. That's not a problem. Sooner the better, especially when it is about eggs. Sooner the better.
So unmarried women are okay, no? Because we have a lot of unmarried Parsi women asking about,
Yes. Anyone can go for egg freezing or sperm freezing if they are planning to delay conception.
Yes, Dr. Mistry, you were saying something.
So absolutely, like Dr. Rita Modi pointed out that, I think a lot of women and men nowadays have obviously are very career oriented. They have really planned their careers that, they're going to put in so many years in their graduation, post graduation, and so many years are going to take place. And basically they have even thought that, oh, I'll get married after the age of 34, 35. Now, like you said that, I'm already 35 and I'm planning for an egg freezing. If that is the scenario, or probably a gamete freezing, it has to be done as soon as possible. The earlier done, the better it is, because after 35, it is as good as doing an IVF. Okay, so the whole process of freezing is to take out the gametes before, that there is any damage. Either, like I said, as the number goes down, after 30, 35 years, the egg number drastically stops, so drastically goes down. So it's always better to get these eggs or get these gametes out before this drastic fall is seen. Basically what they say is that if you have around 12 to 13 eggs, there is a good chance that you will have one pregnancy. So you have to have that 12 or 13 eggs out of you to give you a good chance of pregnancy. So, if at 35, when you have only, say, suppose we have couples, even women coming at 35, 36 with the egg numbers, which are so low that, we have to do 2 or 3 cycles of, taking out egg, pick up on them, taking out eggs and freezing them and storing them. What we call it as the egg pooling, wherever in, like we said, that almost at least 10 to 12 eggs should be there in our stores to, finally give you a pregnancy, because it's not, the pregnancy not only depends upon the egg, it depends upon the embryo. Okay, so we don't know what the male partner is going to have, whether the male partner is having infertility, how many embryos are going to be formed out of those 12 eggs. There is a chance that we might fertilize all 12 eggs, but we might get only 5 to 6 embryos out of them. So eventually it's not the egg number, it's the embryos. So, the whole dictum of more the merrier is good for them. So earlier done, the more eggs are out, the younger the eggs are out, it's always better. Then, like I said, that after 35, there are higher chances of you having genetic issues. There are increased chances of having Downs, Edwards, and all genetic problems in the baby. So it's always better to take them out and store them as soon as possible if you have already taken a decision that you are going to prolong your marriage or conception for some social reasons.
Yeah, I would like to add one more point here. If a couple is married but young and they want to delay conception, so which means that if your partner is fixed, especially from egg freezing point of view, it is always better to create embryos and then get them frozen rather than freezing egg itself, because that gives you, that's from result and outcome perspective. It gives you always much better result, much better recovery. For sperm, it doesn't matter. Yeah, sperm has a very good recovery in any case, as long as the reports are good, initial reports are good.
Thank you, Doctor.
Absolutely, I agree with Dr. Rita Modi. But, there have been some couples, coming and saying that, I don't know whether I'm going to be there with this partner throughout my life.
Prenup.
So there have been instances when I'm not joking, because this is a patient which had come to us and said that, yes, we explained to them, like Dr. Rita Modi pointed out, that the embryo is more of a stronger cell than the egg, So with the chances that you might freeze the embryo, you freeze 10 embryos, there are chances that you might get 8 to 9 embryos back. chances that you freeze 10 eggs, you might get around 6 or 7 eggs back. So it's always better to freeze the embryos. But there are some patients who say that, listen, because the embryo then forms a collective authority of, the couple, so if by chance, if she separates out, she cannot use those embryos without the consent of the male partner. So when we are talking about legality aspect, there are some patients who have come and told us that, we are married, but, we don't know whether we are going to continue. We don't know. So, might as well just do half, freeze half the eggs and freeze half the embryos, but always counsel the patients that, it's always better to freeze the embryos.
Right.
That is the key.
Taking on from there, doctor, what is the lifespan of a frozen embryo or egg or sperm? For how long? Because it is, of course, you have to keep paying the clinic, but for how long would a clinic actually keep it?
Biologically speaking, yeah. You want to take this question, Dr. Prasan?
No. Go ahead, Dr.
Yeah. So biologically speaking, it is unlimited. Biologically speaking, you can keep it for as long as you want, provided the lab at which you have kept it is maintaining it well. But then generally, the ICMR guidelines suggest that you freeze embryos for a maximum duration of 5 years. That is what the current guidelines are suggesting. And a couple who has created embryos naturally will have some purpose in mind of getting a pregnancy sometime or the other. So for embryo, as of now, the guidelines say that 5 years. For egg and sperm, there is no definite period mentioned as such. For example, sometimes we have to freeze eggs or sperm for younger people also. For example, those who are going for some sort of, say, cancer treatment or something. In that case, of course, you can keep it till the person is ready for a conception. You can keep it for as long as necessary.
Great. Just one more question that came up. Dr. Modi, you said 23 would be and beyond would be ideal age for the egg freezing. What if younger age group also, like 18 to 23, also want to go in for it? Is again any age limit or anything for that?
In exceptional circumstances, for example, as we said, cancer chemotherapy or something, you can do it even earlier. Before that, usually ARTs are not recommended. Otherwise, for an otherwise healthy person, good ovarian function, no problem, no emergencies as such. Usually it is better to wait till 23 because the guidelines suggest that way, so that the person is mature enough, emotionally, socially mature enough to understand the implication of what she is going through. Otherwise, medically speaking, it is feasible. It can be done.
Okay, like the legal age of consent in India is 18 years. So anything more than 18 of women can consent for it. But it's very important to know that all these IVF procedures, like I said, also come up with some, ill effects. You have, in some PCOS patients, when we give a lot of injections, there is something which is called as hyperstimulation syndrome, which comes up. Many young girls are not aware of these implications of, probable complications of this. So yes, like Dr. Rita Modi pointed out very, very well that, any patient who is having a cancer treatment, basically, or a patient either who is going to get her ovaries chopped off because of some reasons, because of a big tumor or because of some cyst which has to come out, or due to certain conditions where, certain other cancers in the body where you have to give chemotherapy or you have to give radiation, then it's always better that, a lot of these women should be given an option of, freezing by the oncologist, that is by the cancer consultant, that whenever we are talking about, either affecting any cancer treatments or any radiation, so basically which is going to affect the ovaries. So that is very important to counseling, because a lot of the cancer surgeons, a lot of the cancer specialists do not give out these options. Some people, but we have now new techniques coming up, which is called as the ovarian cortex cryopreservation. That is, if the ovaries are taken out for some reason, you don't need to even go and stimulate the eggs. You just take out the cortex of the ovary. The whole ovary tissue is preserved and later on implanted in the hand, and that is how the pregnancy has come out. And there are reports of that, that just by taking out or probably ovarian tissue, or probably they implanted it anywhere in the body, then they basically do a pickup or laparoscopic pickup, and then they go in for. So ovarian cortex cryopreservation is also comes. Cancer treatments are advancing nowadays. We are seeing a lot of cancer patients coming in, so it's always very important that these patients, younger patients brackets with cancer, absolutely should be given an option of having their gametes preserved, especially with obviously the consent of the guardians. And that is how, because if there's a young patient, she would not understand, what is basically she would want, and want probably a fertility treatment. I mean, she would want a pregnancy later on. So you can take the guardians into the consideration and give them an option of these kind of newer techniques.
Okay, thank you,
Sharing
Doctor.
a personal experience, Pearl.
Yeah.
I had a patient around 8-9 years back, young man, married for 2-3 years, 30-year-old, diagnosed with acute lymphoma, blood cancer. But then the good part was, although it was quite an advanced cancer at that stage, but the good part was the life expectancy was very good. So we froze a few samples of sperm. They were in a hurry because he had to go to Bangalore for starting treatment and all that. So we did freezing of sperm, but the lady fortunately was fine physically. 3 years later, when all his remissions happened, everything happened, the couple was financially, emotionally ready. We did IUI with that frozen sperm. First attempt didn't work. Second attempt, it's a simpler procedure anyways. Yeah. So second attempt, they got twins. And now, they happen to come and live in my neighborhood. I keep meeting those two kids, 4-year-old now. So that's a wonderful feeling.
Wonderful. Yes. A question again with respects to this is, do these diseases in any way affect the eggs before removal? Like genetic, or would the children be affected, either cancer or HIV? The next question I would like to ask was for HIV, but even if it's cancer and the egg is removed, does it affect the quality of the eggs in any way and lead to complications in the baby that will be born?
This can be answered on a one-to-one basis, because there is no broad answer to that. It depends upon the type of cancer, okay. Otherwise health of the leading stage of cancer, many things. It's a complex question. Yeah.
Okay. The next question, Dr. Mistry, I would like to ask was regarding HIV. If the male is affected with HIV and is on antiretroviral, I mean the ART treatment and all, would ICSI or be recommended, or it's only a sperm donor for such a male partner?
So whenever we are talking about HIV, we are talking about either what we call it in our terms as a seroconcordant or a serodiscordant couple. Now, what does this mean is that either one partner is having an HIV and the other partner is free of HIV, or both the partners are having HIV. So what if one partner is having HIV and the second partner is not having HIV? Not only when I'm talking, since I'll take this opportunity, since you're put in a question of HIV, all the sexually transmitted infections which are born through blood or sexually likewise, that is even HBsAg and hepatitis C when we are talking about. So, there is something what we call it as seroconcordant, where both the couples are positive. Now, it's very important that we know first what is the viral load of that couple, that what is the load of the virus which is there in the couple. Now, whenever we are doing semen processing, whenever we are clearing out whenever we are doing an IUI, what we are doing is we are clearing of the seminal plasma from the sperms. So the HIV virus is basically in the semen. It is not in the sperm. So the white liquid bears the virus. The sperm, which is the cell, doesn't have the virus. So when we are taking out, whenever we are doing what we call it as a semen wash, wherever we are clearing the seminal plasma and we are taking out the sperms, there are chances that we are clearing out the virus. It's very important that we tell them that it's not 100%, but it's quite viable that, that the seminal plasma will be free of the virus. Okay. IVF more so good because, we are taking each sperm and we are putting it inside the egg. So if, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So, whenever we are clearing out the seminal plasma, it is quite possible that there is very less likely chances of transmission of HIV in these couples. So, yes, but that is only if the couple is serodiscordant. That is, the wife is HIV negative and the husband is HIV positive. Now, even in the cases of serodiscordant couples of HBsAg, now we have a lot of patients of HBsAg, also hepatitis B, which are coming to us. So if the wife is hepatitis B negative, the husband is hepatitis B positive, it's always better to vaccinate the wife, for hepatitis B vaccine. There are certain vaccines which are available for hepatitis B, which unfortunately are not available for HIV. So you can vaccinate the women for hepatitis B. She can, she can take those 3 doses around 0.16 months, get herself vaccinated, and probably even, start trying, without protection. That is also okay when we see that the antibody levels are quite high. So HIV, yes, absolutely. IUI and IVF does give a sure benefit as far as clearing of the virus from the semen is concerned. However, it is not 100%.
Okay. Pearl, are you there? I think Pearl Mistry has got logged off.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, she's right.
Yeah.
Pearl,
Yeah, sorry, doctor. Yeah, there's some network issue today due to the rains.
Don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. I'm sorry to say that Dr. Rita Modi has just gone up because she had some important thing to attend to. So please continue.
Yes. The participants, please type in any questions. Don't hesitate. Please, you could directly message me or write. We'll be taking only 1 or 2 more questions as our time is up now. Doctor, one more question that had come up was the patient is on antidepressants. If she's say around a 40-year-old lady on antidepressants but wants to go in for IVF, what is the protocol for that?
So antidepressants are as such, she can go in for an IVF as such. But again, it's very important to know that, patients of depression should be like, we have good counselors like you. It's very important that you should come into the picture and, you should be assessing the mental health of the patient. It's just, it is not always, fair to, go in for a treatment when you're not mentally unstable, So I think both the couples should be on the equal, equal page. They should be on the same page when they're going in for an IVF or a fertility treatment. And if women is well controlled on antidepressants, if you feel that, if the psychiatrist or the psychologist feel that she's absolutely in the right mental state of mind to carry on the pregnancy, well and fine, she can continue. There are only certain antidepressants which are contraindicated in pregnancy, which we cannot give certain antidepressants in pregnancy. So it's very important that a lot of couples hide that from us, that they're on antidepressants, they are undergoing depression. So it's very important for the couples to come and be vocal about it and tell us that what drugs they are taking, what medicines they are taking, because eventually the whole protocol is not just to do an IVF, the whole protocol is to give you a pregnancy and to continue the pregnancy in the right state. So certain certain antidepressants are not to be given in pregnancy. So it's always better to switch them off. So it's always good that we know that how we are switching off these medicines, basically switch them off earlier, see that, how they are, controlled on those switch over of the medicines, and then probably take them for a embryo transfer.
Right. Thank you.
So this is true of all psychiatric issues?
When we are talking about antidepressants, when there are certain patients who have suicidal tendencies, there are certain patients who have suicidal thoughts. For them, it's very, very important that we know what we are dealing with, because in that case, we have to take the psychiatrist into consideration, that most of these patients are not fit to undergo the procedure. Because, most of these patients tend to end up into postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, and rather than doing benefit, they could even harm the baby in that whole point. So it's very better, so it's very important to know what state of mind the patient is going in for a fertility treatment.
Does hypothyroid affect pregnancy? TSH score 6.4.
So TSH of 6.4 is quite high. Whenever we are talking, the American College of Obstetric and Gynecology and the American College of Endocrinology gives a guideline of TSH of less than 2.4, 2.5 to be maintained. So it's very important to get the thyroid under control, especially, pregnancy affects a lot of thyroid states. The hormone of pregnancy, which is beta-HCG, which mimics thyroid hormone to such a state. So it's very important that in the first 3 months, we get the thyroids under control. Later on also, we get the thyroids under control. It is very, very important and essential to get these thyroid levels under control. So 2.5 is the mark which we generally are talking about when we are talking about fertility as well as pregnancy. So yes, 6.5, yes, you have to get your thyroids under control. If picked up earlier before conception, way better, because you get a margin to, control your thyroid hormones. If by chance you are pregnant and you realize that you have got a TSH of 6.5, that doesn't mean that you need to abort your pregnancy or you need to get yourself aborted. You need to just get on a higher dose of thyroid medicines and get them under control. Fortunately, thyroid, as a hypothyroidism as a condition is quite good hormonally because it can be controlled with medicines. So it always helps.
Thank you, Doctor. Doctor, one more question that's come up is, does a sickle cell positive mother have chance of passing it on to the kid in IVF or normal conception?
Yeah, so sickle cell as such is what we call it as an it's a condition which is
sickle cell
sickle cell. Yeah, so sickle cell as a condition is characterized by that the blood cells are generally round, but instead of they being round, they are more of a sickle cell variant. That is, they look like this. What happens is the round blood cells can go through the blood vessels very nicely, but the sickle cell blood tends to break up a lot, and that's when the anemia and jaundice tends to come up. Yes, sickle cell as such can be passed on genetically. Okay, there is a chance that it's a autosomally transmitted condition. It's an autosomally transmitted condition, so it will pass on. There are almost 25% chances that it will be transmitted either to a to a boy or a girl, whatever you have. So yes, in such cases of sickle cell anemia, what we can do is, like I pointed out, that another one indication of IVF is when we take out, when we need to know that, the genetically, we are giving a genetically normal embryo. So, so person conceiving naturally would have a chance of transmitting sickle cell. But what we can do is by IVF, if we take out the embryo, we make this embryo, we can either biopsy of this embryo or we can take the liquid out of this embryo, and then we can subject it to genetic analysis and then see how it works out. So we can take the genetic material out of this embryo subject, whether it is having a sickle cell issue or not. And if this embryo is normal, then we can implant this embryo. If the embryo is not normal, we generally tell the couple that, see, this embryo might be progressing into a sickle cell baby. So we generally discard the embryo. So suppose if we have more embryos, we can take the embryos, biopsy them out, and which is sickle cell negative, we can put it back inside the uterus.
Thank you, Dr. Farzan. Next question will be the last question we are taking, Doctor. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. But this is a very important question that has come up. One of our, applicants, basically the first child passed away with CAH issue. Okay. Both the parents have got tested, both are negative, but they are a little scared for, again, after that, there was a normal conception, which also a few months in the pregnancy, the heartbeat stopped. So they lost 2 pregnancies. I mean, one child being born and the other was, a miscarriage kind of thing. Now they are planning a 3rd IVF. So just some light on that, because it's a very anxiety producing situation for them, whether they should go for IVF or not.
Correct. So CAH in our terms, what we call it as a congenital adrenal hyperplasia. It is a condition which is basically due to defective steroid synthesis in the baby. The babies are steroid deficient, and that is where you have congenital adrenal hyperplasia. Now there are a lot of variants of congenital hyperplasia, ranging from the mildest forms ranging to the severest forms. Now there are, what we have it as, we have something which we call it as that childhood onset congenital adrenal hyperplasia, whereas the baby might show symptoms as early as birth, whereas in certain cases of the spectrum that we have adult onset congenital adrenal hyperplasia, the baby just goes out without even knowing anything, and in the adult life, because of certain ways we can come to know by congenital adrenal hyperplasia. Now there is a huge pathway when we are talking about steroid synthesis, and it is the manifestations are way different. So we have lot of congenital adrenal hyperplasia is just a broad term. So we have 3-beta-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase deficiency. We have 11-beta-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase deficiency. So there are a lot of pathways which are linked to that. Manifestations, the severe manifestations of congenital adrenal hyperplasia, which I'm presuming that the child must be having, which is generally called it as a salt wasting disease, which is generally linked with, critical conditions at birth, and the baby requires steroids, and if not given in the right time, generally doesn't last. So this is one variant, which is the severe variant, which we call it as a salt wasting congenital adrenal hyperplasia. Then we have 11 beta hydroxysteroid, which causes blood pressure rise in the children. And there are certain other congenital adrenal hyperplasias wherein, there are features of hermaphroditism. That is, the genitals might look like male and female, so it might, many of these unicoid features might come into place. So congenital adrenal hyperplasia is basically, like I said, it's because of the steroid synthesis deficiency. Now, first and foremost, in this case, we need to know what kind of congenital adrenal hyperplasia was it. Like I said, that it's just a broad term. We have to first mark that what type of congenital adrenal hyperplasia that couple had. Then we have something what we call it as a linking test, or gene link tests, in which what we can do is, even when we are doing an IVF, what we can do is we can do a full genetic link of the couple and see that if the couple, like you said, is most of the couples do the karyotype and they are done with it. But it doesn't stop there. So, you need to do a proper gene linking test for that couple. You have to identify whether there is any inheritance, which is the small inheritance which is passing through the baby. If that is completely out, if that is completely clear, there is no evidence of these genetic problems which are passing on to the baby. Maybe the third child might not have congenital adrenal hyperplasia. No, like you said, the first child had congenital adrenal hyperplasia. Second child, just heartbeat stopped or heartbeat did not continue. That doesn't mean that the second child had congenital adrenal hyperplasia. The miscarriage might be due to some other factor rather than a congenital adrenal hyperplasia, because congenital adrenal hyperplasia as such doesn't go into missed abortions. That is, the baby is forming and not having a heartbeat. So the second miscarriage which they might have might be from a completely different cause. Now, but like I said, that the most common causes of miscarriages in the first 3 months are generally linked to genetic defects. So it's very important to do a full genetic profile of the couple to know whether they are inheriting any minor the gene issue. So what we can do is, whenever we are doing an IVF, whenever we are taking out the embryo, we run that specific gene test on the embryo and see whether that embryo is that gene deficient. And then if it is, we don't transfer the embryo. And if that embryo is genetically viable, we can go on and transfer in the couple. Now, even if by chance this couple conceives naturally, there is a chance wherein we generally can make sure whether the baby is having congenital adrenal hyperplasia as early as 7 to 8 weeks. What we do is we go in with the similar needle, like how we do a egg pickup, and we do what we call it earlier as a chorionic villi biopsy, a CVB, rather than doing an amniocentesis. Amniocentesis is done at a later stage at around 16 to 18 weeks, but the chorionic villi biopsy can be done as early as 8 weeks. So just by knowing that if the baby is congenital adrenal hyperplasia, if it comes out to be positive, by just giving steroids to the mother, the condition itself may come under control and the baby will come out to be a natural, without any defects of congenital adrenal hyperplasia. So that itself can solve the problem. So yes, IVF is a good option for them, considering that they have gone through two mishaps in their pregnancy. They would also, what IVF will do is that it will decrease the time to conception. That is, it will shorten the time to conception. And also, if you are doing a gene link test on that particular embryo and finding out whether it is positive for that specific gene if they're inheriting, then yes, probably it will be an advantage. Even like I said, if they conceive naturally, no problem. It can still be figured out by doing a CVB at as early as 8 to 9 weeks and knowing whether the baby is CAH positive. And even if it is CAH positive, by just giving steroids, a minor steroid dose to the mother, can reverse this condition.
Thank you so much, Doctor. We also have many more questions coming up, but it's almost 11:50.
Yes.
So I would recommend the viewers, please write to us on geoparsi151@gmail. We'll forward the questions to Dr. Parzan and get back to you. That for one is about the cost of freezing the embryos and sperms, and any guidelines to give parents who have thalassaemic issues. So Dr. Parzan, if you could write that to us, we'll get back
I will just write that.
Our viewers. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The questions asked, please share your mobile number with our counselors. That is myself or Shamla, and we will write back to you. Thank you, Dr. Parzan. It was really, really an eye-opening session. I'm sure most of us got to know a lot of new things, which maybe even Google Baba couldn't have answered. So thank you for your time, and looking forward to our next session next month. Thank you.
Thanks
Shamla,
a lot, Pearl.
yeah,
Thanks, Shamla, for having me.
Oh, entirely our pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Parzan.
Thank you.
Once again, vaccination, jaan hai to jahan hai. Do not forget, it's everything will go on, IVF, pregnancy, babies, but we need to be safe. We need to stay sane.
Stay safe.
God bless. Yes, God bless. Have a great Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you, viewers.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Take care.